The mist was a living thing, a ghostly serpent that slithered over the rugged terrain of the Scottish Highlands, embracing the scattered cottages with its cold, damp coils. As the coach lumbered through the narrow, winding path, Elspeth McGregor peered out from the rain-speckled window, her gaze penetrating the dense fog that seemed to swallow the landscape whole. The village of Glenmire was nothing more than a smudge on the horizon, a cluster of dark shapes gradually taking form as the coach drew nearer. Elspeth's heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The village was far more remote than she had imagined, isolated by both geography and the palpable weight of its own history. The ancient castle, which she could just discern through the lifting veil of fog, stood sentinel over the village, its turrets jagged against the grey sky like broken teeth. As the coach creaked to a halt in the village square, Elspeth stepped out, her boots splashing in a shallow puddle. The air was thick with the scent of peat and wet earth, the sounds of the village subdued as if muffled by the mist. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, surveying her new surroundings with keen interest. The villagers were sparse and moved with purpose, their faces etched with lines of hardship and eyes that flickered with a blend of curiosity and caution. They eyed the newcomer, their glances quick and somewhat wary. Elspeth knew her arrival, a new schoolteacher with a scholarly interest in folklore, might stir both hope and suspicion among the villagers, whose roots ran as deep as the gnarled trees lining the muddy roads. Duncan Reid, the village blacksmith, was the first to approach. His stature was imposing, his features rough-hewn like the iron he worked. He offered a nod of greeting, his hand extended in welcome. "Miss McGregor, I presume? I'm Duncan Reid. Welcome to Glenmire." "Thank you, Mr. Reid," Elspeth replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. She noted the strength in his grip, the calluses on his palms that spoke of hard, honest labor. "It's quite the journey up here, isn't it? The land seems to have a life of its own." "Aye, that it does," Duncan agreed, a trace of a smile softening his stern expression. "It can be beautiful, but it's not without its challenges. The mist, for one, can be treacherous. Best not to wander alone, especially when they descend low like this." Elspeth nodded, her mind alight with thoughts. So, the mist is more than just a climatic nuisance. It's a barrier, a protector, perhaps even a prison. She glanced at the castle again, its outline now shrouded in the thickening fog. "What secrets are you hiding in your stone heart?" "I intend to learn all I can about Glenmire and its history," she said, her eyes still fixed on the distant silhouette of the castle. "The past seems very much alive here." Duncan looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mix of approval and warning. "It is, Miss McGregor. And not all of it is eager to be remembered. But if it's stories you're after, you'll find no shortage here. Just be wary, some tales don't like to be told." Elspeth's smile was a mix of determination and intrigue. "I'm not just here to teach. I'm here to discover," she mused, her academic fervor kindling a flame of excitement. She turned her attention back to Duncan, ready to plant her feet on this new, mysterious ground. "Thank you, Mr. Reid. I look forward to learning more. About everything." As Duncan led her to her new home, a small cottage not far from the square, Elspeth felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, the silent whispers of the village weaving around her like the ever-present mist. Glenmire was a puzzle, and she was eager to unravel it, piece by piece. Yet, as the castle loomed again through the fog, she couldn't help but wonder if some pieces were meant to remain lost, buried under layers of silence and shadow. The night descended like a cloak over Glenmire, the darkness almost palpable, as if it too were woven from the same mist that clung so tenaciously to the land. Elspeth McGregor sat by the small fireplace of her new home, the flames casting playful shadows against the walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the branches of the ancient trees, carrying with it the earthy scent of the wet highlands. Despite the warmth of the fire, a chill seemed to seep through the cracks of the old cottage. Elspeth pulled a woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders, her mind replaying Duncan's words about the mists, and the stories hidden within them. She reached for one of the old books she had brought with her, its pages filled with Celtic myths and legends, hoping to find distraction in tales of heroes and monsters. Yet, her thoughts were elsewhere, wandering the fog-shrouded paths of Glenmire. As the clock on the mantelpiece ticked towards midnight, a faint noise caught her attention, pulling her from her reverie. It was a soft, scraping sound, like stone on stone. She listened intently, her breath held in suspense. There it was again, closer this time, unmistakable against the backdrop of the howling wind. Elspeth rose from her chair, the book forgotten on her lap, and peered out of the window. The mist was thick, a white veil that obscured the moonlight, but she could just make out the shapes of the cottages across the way. The scraping sound continued, rhythmic and persistent. Is someone out there? She wondered, a ripple of unease running through her. The rational part of her mind chided her for her nerves, reminding her of the mundane nature of village life. Yet, the atmosphere of Glenmire, charged with whispered superstitions, seemed to paint every sound with a brush of the ethereal. She opened the door slightly, the cold air rushing in like a flood. The sound was clearer now, and it was coming from the direction of the village square. Wrapped in her blanket and curiosity, Elspeth stepped outside, her gaze searching through the dense fog. The village was shrouded in silence now, the scraping sound having ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Moving cautiously, she made her way towards the square, her eyes straining to adjust to the thick mist that swirled around her. Each step seemed to echo off the surrounding cottages, magnifying her presence in the quiet night. As she approached the square, the silhouette of the old fountain loomed ahead, its familiar shape oddly menacing in the dim light. There, on the ground near the fountain, Elspeth noticed something unusual, an array of small stones arranged in a peculiar pattern. They weren't there before, she was sure of it. The pattern was intricate, almost deliberate, and she felt a shiver of fascination rather than fear. Kneeling down for a closer look, she traced the outline of the symbols with her finger, their cold, damp surface whispering secrets of ages past. Her heart raced as she realized these were no ordinary stones. They were marked with symbols she recognized from her readings, ancient Celtic runes used in protective rites. Who would place these here, and why now? The question spun in her head as she stood, her gaze sweeping the misty expanse of the square, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the fog. Deciding it was best not to linger, Elspeth hurried back to her cottage, the weight of the village's mysteries growing heavier with each step. Once inside, she bolted the door and stood for a moment in the silence of her home, trying to make sense of what she had seen. As she prepared for bed, her mind was abuzz with thoughts. This village holds more than just stories. It harbors secrets, secrets that are alive and reaching out. She climbed into bed, the flicker of the candle casting dancing shadows across the room. Outside, the mist pressed against the windows, a silent sentinel watching over Glenmire and its newest inhabitant. Elspeth closed her eyes, her dreams poised to wander the shadowy realm between myth and reality. Morning light filtered through the cottage windows, its brilliance a stark contrast to the night's eerie embrace. Elspeth McGregor awoke with a start, the remnants of a dream dissipating as reality took hold. The stones, the symbols, and the fog-swathed village square mingled in her mind, blending the boundaries between sleep and wakefulness. She rose and dressed quickly, the chill of the morning air biting as she pulled on her boots. Her first instinct was to revisit the square by daylight, to see the stones under the unobscured light of day, but a deeper curiosity urged her to understand the people of Glenmire first. To understand a place, you must first understand its people, she mused, recalling a line from one of her old anthropology texts. Elspeth decided to begin her day at the village market. As she stepped outside, the mist had lifted, leaving behind dew that sparkled on the cobblestones and grass. The market was modest, a handful of stalls set up near the square where farmers and craftsmen displayed their wares. The villagers eyed her with a reserved curiosity, their whispers floating in the crisp morning air. At a stall laden with fresh vegetables, Elspeth struck up a conversation with Mrs. Barrow, a stout woman with a kindly face and hands roughened by years of toil. "The soil here is stubborn," Mrs. Barrow explained as she handed Elspeth a basket of turnips. "But it gives us what we need, if we respect it. Like the village itself, I suppose?" Elspeth nodded, weaving her inquiry into their chat. "I noticed some unusual stones in the square last night, arranged in patterns. Do they have a special meaning?" she asked, her voice casual but her eyes keenly observing Mrs. Barrow's reaction. The woman stiffened slightly, her smile faltering. "Ah, those old superstitions, nothing more. Some believe they protect us from the misfortunes that haunt this land." She glanced around before leaning closer, lowering her voice. "But talk of such things is best kept quiet. Superstitions can be powerful." Encouraged by Mrs. Barrow's cryptic yet insightful comment, Elspeth visited other stalls, each conversation weaving a richer tapestry of Glenmire's cultural and historical fabric. She learned of harvest rituals, of legends involving the ancient castle, and of the reverence and fear the villagers held for the surrounding lands. Midday found her at the local inn, where she shared a meal with Duncan, who seemed pleased yet cautious about her enthusiastic dive into village life. Over bowls of hearty stew, she shared her findings from the morning. "The villagers are bound by these legends and superstitions. It's fascinating how these beliefs seem to shape their lives," she said, her mind racing with theories and questions. Duncan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Aye, that they do. But be mindful, Elspeth. These beliefs, they aren't just stories to them. They're real as the earth and sky. Sometimes, digging too deep can unearth things best left undisturbed." Elspeth considered his words, her academic zeal tempered by the caution in his tone. Perhaps understanding requires a delicate touch, especially here, she thought. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the outline of the castle stood stark against the skyline. Asterisk, what secrets are you guarding? And at what cost? Asterisk. The afternoon waned as Elspeth continued her exploration, visiting the village elder, a wizened man named Mr. Finlay, who regaled her with tales of Glenmire's past, each story embroidered with elements of the mystical and the mundane. "The castle's always been a beacon of sorts," he murmured, his voice a raspy whisper. "A beacon for the good, and for the ill. Depends on who's looking, and what they're seeing." Returning to her cottage as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elspeth felt a deepening connection to Glenmire. Her initial role as an observer slowly morphed into that of a participant, her presence now a thread in the village's ongoing narrative. As she penned her thoughts in a journal, the flickering candlelight cast shadows that danced across the pages, mimicking the elusive nature of the truths she sought. That night, as a gentle rain began to tap against the window panes, Elspeth's thoughts lingered on the protective symbols, the whispered stories, and Duncan's warnings. She realized that her journey into the heart of Glenmire was not just about uncovering hidden truths, but also about navigating the delicate balance between belief and reality, folklore and fact. As sleep claimed her once more, her dreams were a mosaic of misty landscapes and echoing voices, a testament to the enigmatic allure of Glenmire, a village where every stone and shadow had. The morning dawned clear, a rare gift in the shadow of the Highlands. As Elspeth stepped out into the cool air, she resolved to visit the ancient castle that loomed on the outskirts of Glenmire. Despite Duncan's cautionary words, her scholarly curiosity was too strong to ignore the pull of history that the castle represented. "Today, I shall see it for myself," she thought, her determination setting the rhythm of her stride. Elspeth chose a path that wound through the forest, a trail less traveled but direct. The trees stood tall and close, their branches forming a canopy that occasionally let shafts of sunlight pierce through, illuminating the mossy undergrowth. As she walked, the air grew cooler, the shadow of the castle growing ever more imposing with each step. Halfway through her journey, the quiet was shattered by a rustling in the underbrush. Elspeth paused, her hand going to the small book of Celtic symbols she had tucked into her belt. A red fox burst from the foliage, its eyes bright and fleeting as it crossed her path and disappeared into the trees on the other side. An omen, she wondered, recalling the legends where foxes were often messengers, harbingers of change or warnings. She continued her trek, the silhouette of the castle now clearly visible against the sky. The structure was both magnificent and menacing, its stones worn by centuries of conflict and weather, ivy creeping over its surface like green veins on a giant's arm. The closer she got, the heavier the air seemed, as if the very atmosphere was saturated with the echoes of the past. Approaching the main gate, she was startled to find it slightly ajar. Curious, she mused, for a place reputed to be uninhabited. Pushing the heavy iron door, it groaned a protest, the sound echoing off the inner walls of the castle courtyard. The courtyard itself was overgrown, the once manicured gardens now wild with neglect, and the fountain in the center lay broken, its cherub stained with moss. It was there, by the shattered fountain, that she first saw him, Sir Alastair Douglas. He stood as if materialized from the mist itself, his presence almost spectral. His hair was peppered gray, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on Elspeth as she approached. "Miss McGregor, I presume?" His voice was smooth, yet it carried an edge that seemed honed by solitude and something darker, perhaps bitterness. "You are far from the village square." Elspeth steadied her nerves before replying. "Yes, Sir Alastair. I've come to learn about the castle and its history. I am fascinated by the heritage of Glenmire." Sir Alastair studied her for a moment, his gaze piercing. "Many are drawn to these ruins, yet few understand what they truly behold. This place is more than stone and memory. It is a bastion of power, held by my family for generations." He began to walk, motioning for her to follow. As they strolled through the remnants of what had once been majestic halls, Sir Alastair spoke of the castle's history, of battles fought and lost, of alliances and betrayals. The castle, he explained, was not just a home but a custodian of ancient rites, some so perilous that they were hidden even from his ancestors. "The land remembers, Miss McGregor," he said, stopping before a large, ornate door carved with intricate runes. "It remembers and sometimes it calls back." Elspeth felt a chill as she looked at the symbols, recognizing some from the protective stones in the village square. "What are you not telling me?" she thought, her curiosity now tinged with a thread of fear. "I must caution you, young lady." Sir Alastair's voice broke through her thoughts, bringing her back to the dim light of the castle corridor. "Prying into the past can awaken things best left dormant. Not all stories wish to be unearthed." As they exited the castle, Elspeth felt the weight of his warning settle around her like the mist that had started to descend once more. She thanked Sir Alastair for his time and insights but left with more questions than answers. The walk back to the village was quiet, the only sounds her footsteps and the whispering wind, which seemed to murmur secrets just beyond her grasp. That evening, as Elspeth recorded the day's events in her journal, she pondered Sir Alastair's words. What lies beneath the surface of Glenmire? And what cost comes with the pursuit of its secrets? The answers seemed as obscured as the path through the mist, each step revealing only a fragment of the larger puzzle. In the days following her visit to the castle, Elspeth found herself drawn deeper into the fabric of Glenmire. Each morning brought a mist that cloaked the village in secrecy and silence, and with it, a growing sense of unease nestled itself within her. The words of Sir Alastair lingered in her mind like an unshakable echo, warning of the dangers buried beneath layers of history and earth. Determined to unravel the threads Sir Alastair had alluded to, Elspeth set out to examine the symbols she had seen both at the castle and in the village square. Armed with her notes and sketches, she converted a corner of her cottage into a makeshift study. Maps of the area, old books on Celtic mythology, and her own detailed drawings papered the walls, forming a collage of clues that seemed to whisper secrets just beyond reach. As she pored over the symbols, Tracing their lines and forms, she began to see patterns that suggested not just protection but also summoning. What were the Douglases trying to call forth? She pondered, her fingers pausing over a particularly intricate symbol that repeated itself across different mediums. Her research led her to an old ledger at the village library, buried under dust and forgotten lore. It contained references to similar symbols used during the late medieval period, hinting at their use in rituals meant to harness natural forces. The ledger mentioned a sect of druids who believed that certain locations were nexuses of mystical energy, portals that could connect the physical world with the realms beyond. The library's air was stale, the light dim, as if resisting the intrusion of the modern world. Elspeth's eyes scanned the ancient text, translating the Latin phrases with meticulous care. Each page turned was a step back in time, revealing layers of belief system that intertwine nature, spirituality, and the stark realities of medieval life. Outside, the weather turned as she read. Rain pattered against the window, a reminder of the natural forces that shaped the lives of those in Glenmire. The sound of the rain seemed almost rhythmic, a primal music that underscored the gravity of her discoveries. Am I ready for what I might uncover? She asked herself, a tinge of apprehension threading through her resolve. Deciding she needed more direct evidence, Elspeth revisited the village square under the guise of an evening walk. The stones were still there, less ominous in the fading light but no less significant. Kneeling beside them, she placed her hand lightly on the cold surface, feeling the etched runes under her fingertips. The sensation was electrifying, as if the stones pulsed with a life of their own. A sudden chill caused her to glance up, her breath catching in her throat. Across the square, a figure watched from the shadows, their features obscured by the falling dusk. Elspeth stood slowly, her heart racing not with fear, but with the thrill of the unknown. The figure receded into the darkness as she approached, leaving her with a new puzzle piece. Back at her cottage, Elspeth laid out her findings on the table, her mind racing as she connected the dots. The stones, the castle, the mysterious figure, they were all part of a larger story, a tapestry woven with threads of power, history, and danger. She realized that her role was no longer that of a mere observer but rather a participant in an unfolding mystery that had chosen her as much as she had chosen it. That night, as she prepared for bed, Elspeth reflected on the path she had embarked upon. The wind howled outside, a wild chorus that seemed to speak directly to her soul. She knew that the coming days would likely bring challenges that tested her courage and curiosity, but she felt ready. After all, Glenmire had more to show her, and she was eager to learn its deepest truths, regardless of the shadows they might cast. As she drifted into sleep, her dreams were a vivid tapestry of swirling mists, ancient runes, and whispering woods, each element beckoning her deeper into the heart of Glenmire's hidden past. In the soft light of dawn, Elspeth McGregor revisited the village square, her thoughts a whirlwind of the previous night's revelations. The stones, now familiar under her touch, seemed to resonate with an energy that the daylight couldn't dim. Her heart was set. Today, she would share her findings with Duncan. If anyone could help her navigate the dangers of Glenmire's hidden layers, it was the pragmatic blacksmith whose roots were as deep as the ancient oaks that lined the village pathways. Elspeth found Duncan at his forge, the clang of his hammer ringing clear across the morning air. He looked up as she approached, wiping the sweat from his brow with a rough cloth. His face, usually so stoic, softened at her approach. "Duncan, we need to talk," Elspeth said, her voice urgent. She glanced around, ensuring no prying ears were within reach. "It's about the stones in the square, and the castle." Duncan set his tools aside, his expression turning serious. "I figured you'd dig up something sooner or later," he admitted, leading her into the cool shadows of his workshop. "What's on your mind?" Elspeth spread her notes on a sturdy wooden table, her fingers tracing the lines of the symbols she had sketched. "These aren't just relics of old superstitions," she began, her eyes locked on Duncan's. "They're part of something much bigger. A network of mystical energy, Possibly for summoning something otherworldly. Duncan looked skeptical, but he listened intently as Elspeth explained her findings, detailing the connections between the castle's history and the mysterious symbols. Sir Alastair warned me about delving too deep, she added, a shiver running through her despite the forge's warmth. Duncan's gaze was thoughtful as he absorbed her words. Alastair's a troubled man, but not a fool. If he's warned you, it's because there's real danger, he said slowly. We need to be cautious, Elspeth. This isn't just about curiosity anymore, it's about safety. Together, they decided to seek more concrete evidence. They would start at the castle, exploring the areas that Elspeth hadn't ventured into during her last visit. The decision made, Elspeth felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the crux of her research, the moment where all her theories would be tested against the stark reality of Glenmire's ancient secrets. Later that afternoon, under a sky that threatened rain, Elspeth and Duncan made their way to the castle. The air was heavy, charged with a tension that seemed to echo the tumultuous history of the land. As they walked, Duncan shared tales his grandfather had told him, stories of shadows seen wandering the castle halls and of whispers in the wind that spoke in forgotten tongues. Reaching the castle, they found the main gate as Elspeth had left it, slightly ajar. The grandeur of the ruins was somber in the overcast light, their silence a stark contrast to the forge's lively clangs. They moved cautiously, aware of the weight of countless years watching them from the crumbling stone. Inside, Elspeth led Duncan to the ornate door where she had last spoken with Sir Alastair. The runes were just as she remembered, intricate and unnerving. She pulled out her notes, comparing them to the carvings, while Duncan kept watch, his hand resting uneasily on the hilt of a small knife he had brought for protection. Suddenly, a low moan echoed through the halls, a sound neither wind nor human. Duncan stiffened, his eyes searching the shadows that seemed to deepen with each passing moment. "We're not alone," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Elspeth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the castle's dampness. Her research had prepared her for many things, but the reality of encountering something undefinable was daunting. Yet her resolve hardened. "Let's find out what's waiting for us," she said, more bravely than she felt. They proceeded deeper into the castle, the air growing colder, the moans more frequent. Each step seemed to lead them not just through the castle but back through time, to a period where the line between the earthly and the ethereal was blurred. The deeper they went, the stronger the sensation of being watched. When they finally reached a small chamber, hidden away behind a tapestry that depicted the celestial movements, they found it, a circle of stones, similar to those in the village square, arranged meticulously on the ground. The air around it vibrated with an unseen energy, the stones almost humming with power. Duncan and Elspeth exchanged a look of mixed fear and fascination. Here was the heart of the mystery, the nexus of energies Sir Alastair had perhaps unwittingly revealed. The chamber was dim, lit only by slivers of light that managed to penetrate the thick walls of the castle. The air was thick with a palpable tension that seemed almost electric. Elspeth and Duncan stood at the edge of the circle of stones, their eyes fixed on the vibrating ground. This is it," Elspeth whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "These stones, they're not just markers, they're a conduit." Duncan knelt beside one of the stones, running his fingers over the intricate carvings. "What do you think they're channeling?" His voice was low, filled with a wary respect for the forces they were tampering with. Elspeth pulled out her notes, cross-referencing the symbols with the descriptions she had read in the ancient ledger. "If I'm reading this right, these are summoning stones. They were used in druidic rituals to call forth something from another plane of existence." As the reality of the situation dawned on them, a cold draft swept through the room, stirring the dust into mini whirlwinds. Duncan stood abruptly, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his belt. "Elspeth, we should not linger here too long. This place feels wrong." Just then, a low growl resonated through the chamber, more felt than heard. The stones pulsed with a deeper intensity, their glow brightening momentarily. Elspeth's heart raced as she scanned the shadows, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "Something's here with us," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. Duncan moved closer to her, his eyes scanning the darkness. "We need to disrupt the circle, break the connection." He pointed to a gap between two stones that seemed to be the focal point of the energy flow. Elspeth nodded, stepping forward to push one of the stones with her foot. The moment her boot touched the stone, the air in the chamber thickened, and the growl turned into a cacophony of whispers, as if 100 voices were speaking at once. With a swift motion, Duncan shoved the stone, breaking the circle. The whispers halted abruptly, replaced by a silence so deep it was almost suffocating. Elspeth and Duncan exchanged a relieved glance, but their respite was short-lived. From the shadows, a figure emerged, stepping into the faint light. It was Sir Alastair, his face a mask of fury and betrayal. "You fools!" he hissed, his voice a mix of rage and desperation. "Do you realize what you've done?" Elspeth faced him, her resolve firm. "We've stopped whatever you were trying to summon. This isn't just about heritage or power, Sir Alastair. You were endangering the entire village." Sir Alastair advanced, his hands clenched at his sides. "You know nothing! My family's legacy was meant to protect this land, to harness the energies for Glenmire's prosperity." His eyes were wild, reflecting a madness driven by obsession. Duncan stepped between them, his stance protective. "It ends now, Alastair. No more shadows, no more whispers. This madness ends with us." A standoff ensued, the tension palpable. Sir Alastair seemed to contemplate his options, his gaze shifting from Duncan to Elspeth and back again. Finally, with a snarl of frustration, he turned and vanished into the darkness of the corridors, his footsteps echoing until they too were swallowed by the silence. Elspeth let out a long breath, her body relaxing slightly. "We need to ensure this can't happen again," she said, her mind already racing with ways to permanently seal the chamber. Duncan nodded, his eyes still wary. "We'll seal it off, warn the villagers about the castle's dangers. No one should have access to this power." Together they exited the chamber, leaving the stones untouched in their broken circle. As they walked back through the castle, the weight of their actions settled on their shoulders. They had prevented a potential disaster, but at what cost? Back in the village, they were met with curious glances, but Elspeth knew that the full story of what happened in the castle would remain between her and Duncan. Glenmire was safe, for now, but the shadows of the past would always linger, just on the edge of the mist. The return to the village felt different this time. As Elspeth and Duncan walked through the winding paths of Glenmire, the weight of their recent encounter at the castle lay heavily upon them, like the dense highland mist that refused to lift. Despite the late hour, a few villagers lingered outside, their eyes reflecting the glow of the lanterns that flickered in the gentle evening breeze. They nodded cautiously to Elspeth and Duncan, sensing that something significant had transpired. Once they reached the relative privacy of Duncan's forge, they both sighed, the sound echoing slightly against the cool stone walls. Duncan stoked the fire back to life, the flames casting a warm, reassuring light in the dim space. He turned to Elspeth, his brow furrowed with concern. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, his voice grave. "We've stopped something tonight, but I fear the story doesn't end here." Elspeth nodded, her mind racing with the implications of their discovery. "We disrupted the ritual, yes, but the energies we felt, they were ancient, rooted deeply in the land itself. We can seal the chamber, but the legends and the lore that fuel such power, they won't simply vanish." Duncan pulled up two worn chairs, and they sat facing each other by the fire. "The villagers," he started, hesitating as he searched for the right words. "They trust us, especially you, Elspeth. If we tell them everything, it might sow panic, or worse, curiosity. We might end up leading more people straight to the danger we're trying to contain. Elspeth considered this, her gaze lost in the flames. Perhaps we need a new legend, she suggested softly. One that warns of the dangers, cloaked in a tale that speaks of guardianship and protection. We can use the truth, but frame it in a way that keeps the curious at bay. Duncan looked at her, admiration mingling with his concern. You take on that role? The guardian of tales? It seems I already have, Elspeth replied with a wry smile. Tonight I realized that my arrival here wasn't just chance. Maybe, in some way, I was meant to find these secrets and help protect them. They spent the rest of the evening planning. They discussed strategies to seal the chamber more permanently, involving old masonry techniques that would blend with the ancient stone of the castle, making the entrance nearly impossible to find. Duncan knew people he could trust who would help without asking too many questions. And what of Sir Alastair? Elspeth finally asked, the image of his enraged, desperate figure haunting her thoughts. He won't simply give up his ancestral pursuits. Duncan's face hardened. I'll handle Alastair. I believe there's still good in him, clouded by his obsessions. I'll try to reach out, make him see reason. If not, he paused, the flicker of the fire reflecting in his eyes. Then we'll need to be prepared for him to return. As the night deepened, Elspeth felt the enormity of their task. They were custodians now, guardians against the shadows they had themselves brought to light. As they parted ways, a sense of resolve settled over Elspeth. She walked back to her cottage under the starlit sky, feeling the ancient land whisper around her. In the quiet of her home, she began to draft the new legend. With each word, she wove protection into the very fabric of Glenmire's history, crafting a tale that spoke of bravery, darkness, and the eternal vigilance needed to keep the shadows at bay. She worked until dawn, her candle burning low, casting long shadows across the manuscript. The next morning, Elspeth presented her story to the village at the communal hall. Her words captivated her audience, blending the real and the mystical into a narrative that enthralled as much as it warned. Her tale spoke of a hidden danger, forever sealed by the brave actions of unnamed guardians who stood watch over Glenmire's peace. As she spoke, she saw the flicker of understanding in the villagers' eyes, their nods of agreement binding them to their new role as protectors of the legend. They left the hall with a renewed sense of purpose, a community bonded not just by history, but by the shared duty to guard its mysteries. Elspeth's story spread, becoming part of the village lore. It was whispered around firesides, shared from parent to child, a story of darkness held at bay by the vigilance of those who cared deeply for their home. And as the days grew into weeks, the shadows receded, becoming part of the land's deep memory, watched over by those who knew the cost of ignorance and the value of a well-kept secret. As the seasons turned, the village of Glenmire settled into a new rhythm, one that hummed with the undercurrents of the secret Elspeth and Duncan had safeguarded. The story Elspeth had woven into the fabric of the village's lore served as both a shield and a sentinel, its narrative a subtle guardian against the curiosity that had once threatened to awaken the darker underbelly of the land. Elspeth found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet solace of the glens and forests surrounding Glenmire. With each walk, she felt the land speaking to her in whispers carried by the wind, telling tales of ages past and secrets buried deep in the earth. She often stopped by the old castle, its ruins now a silent testament to the battles fought, both physical and mystical. One crisp, clear evening, as she wandered the castle's boundary, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Duncan, his presence a familiar comfort. "You've been spending a lot of time here," Duncan remarked, joining her as they both looked out over the castle ruins bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Elspeth nodded. "It feels necessary," she confessed. "Like keeping watch over a sleeping giant. I think about what we've prevented and what still might be beneath us, waiting." Duncan stood beside her, his gaze thoughtful. "Do you ever regret knowing what lies beneath? The peace we had before?" Sometimes, Elspeth admitted, her voice soft. But then I remember that ignorance isn't bliss, it's just another form of darkness. We've given Glenmire a light, however small. Their conversation drifted then to lighter topics, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Duncan's tone shifted, becoming more serious. There's something else, he began hesitantly. Sir Alastair has not been seen since that night. No signs of him anywhere, which is unsettling. Elspeth's brow furrowed in concern. You think he might be planning something? I don't know, Duncan sighed. But I keep watch, just in case. We both know the kind of power that castle holds, and what it could do in the wrong hands. As darkness enveloped the landscape, they made their way back to the village, the silence between them filled with a mutual understanding of the responsibilities they carried. The village lights twinkled in the distance, a beacon of normalcy and peace. In the weeks that followed, Elspeth took to documenting everything they had learned, from the properties of the summoning stones to the specifics of the druidic rituals they had disrupted. Her cottage became a small archive of the mystical and historical secrets of Glenmire, a repository of knowledge that might one day serve as a guide should the shadows rise again. One afternoon, while organizing her notes, Elspeth received a visitor. It was a young girl from the village, her eyes wide with curiosity and something akin to awe. Miss McGregor, Mida says you know all the stories of the old castle and the land. Can you teach me? She asked, her voice tinged with eager innocence. Elspeth smiled, sensing the continuation of her role as the guardian of tales. Of course, child. But remember, with knowledge comes responsibility. As the girl nodded solemnly, Elspeth felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was not just a keeper of secrets, but a teacher, passing on the wisdom needed to maintain the delicate balance between the known and the unknown. The legacy of Glenmire continued, its stories woven into the fabric of the community, each tale a thread in the broader tapestry of the village's history. Elspeth's role as a storyteller evolved, becoming as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. And as she taught the younger generations, the echoes of the past whispered through the trees, a reminder of the ever-present dance between light and shadow. The village of Glenmire, under her watchful eye, thrived, its mysteries no longer a threat but a testament to the courage and vigilance of those who dared to look deeper, to guard the light against the encroaching dark. Thank you for sharing a moment of your day with me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Really helps a lot. If you don't, well, I'll still love you. Thanks for stopping by.